Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mihaela Campion, and I have the pleasure to welcome you today to the past, present, and future of gender studies in Romania, an event organized by Archer, American Romanian Coalition for Human and Equal Rights, with our special guest speakers today, Maria Bucur and Mihaela Miroiu. Welcome and thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be here with us today and to discuss this incredible topic. We really appreciate your presence with us today. I would like to say a few words about housekeeping. We are planning to have a conversation on gender studies in Romania with Mihaela and Maria today. And at the end, we want to leave about 10-15 minutes, depending on how many questions and comments we have from the audience. We leave this time at the end of the event for everybody to have a chance to ask questions or make comments. So feel free to go to the comments section of this video on our page, on Archer's page, and communicate there everything that you have, and hopefully at the end, our guest speakers will have a chance to respond and comment as well. Krina Tarasi from Archer will gather your questions and comments and will present them at the end to our guest speakers. So I would like to start by saying a few words about our guest speakers. Two remarkable scholars, Romanian scholars. So Maria is the John V. Hill Chair of East European History and Professor of Gender Studies at Indiana University. She's the author of numerous books, including Eugenics and Modernization in Interwar Romania, Heroes and Victims, Remembering War in 20th Century Romania, and The Century of Women, How Women Have Transformed the World Since 1900. She's also the author of a lot of articles, so if you want to find out more about her bio, check our section in the discussions, and also Google her. You'll find out a lot of very interesting things about her activity in writing and gender studies. Mihaela Miroiu is joining us from Romania. Very excited about that. I'm just thinking for a moment to be in Bucharest with you, my hometown. She's a professor of political science at the National School for Political Studies and Public Administration, Bucharest, Romania. Her books include Guidelines for Promoting Equity in Higher Education, Drumul către autonomie, The Road to Autonomy, Feminist Political Theories, and Neprețuitele femei, Priceless Women. I love this title. And her memoir, Thinking Like a Woman, Cu mintea mea de femeie, was shortlisted for PAN 2018 awards. Again, we talked today to two incredible women. So my short presentation is really short. So if you want to find out more, feel free to go online or ask questions or check their books, and you will not regret that for sure. So again, welcome. I would like to say a few words about what we plan to do today. I learned that the two of you have been in conversation, in a constant dialogue for decades. So we have not just two guest speakers today. We have two friends, two women who made a contribution, who collaborated, who modeled for all of us what it means to collaborate for a good cause. So I welcome that, and I appreciate and I feel extremely honored to be here with you today. So they have been in conversation, in dialogue, first as fellow feminists in a small community of scholars working on gender studies in Romania. And eventually that culminated with co-authoring a book, Birth of Democratic Citizenship, I'm going to share that as well. Maria, if you don't mind, I want to share, you know. All right, so I don't have it here, but please show it again.
The Romanian version.
Yes.
Yes.
Incredible cover. So this, you know, you co-authored this book together. It was published in 2018 by Indiana University Press and then translated into Romanian in 2019. I've learned also that a year ago, the two of you have planned a trip from Bucharest to Tuscany to work on your projects. And unfortunately, due to the pandemic, you know, like all of our trips have been put on hold, postponed. So that had never happened. But you are here today with us. You came together to this event to discuss recent developments in the area of women's rights and gender studies in Romania, and also to reflect on the impact of the pandemic in the communities where the two of you live, Bucharest and respectively Bloomington, Indiana. So March is the month of women's. We celebrate is the history, the Women's History Month. So I would like to start with that. We already had a few questions about the Women's History Month. And I would like to start our conversation by asking the two of you, how do you reflect during the month of Women's Month, the history of women? What's your reflection and what's your involvement with feminism and gender analysis?
Mihaela, do you want to start? How would you like to go?
No, please do it.
Okay.
I leave it to you.
Okay. So I want to thank the organizers for how generously they approached us and gave us this space that Zoom created and COVID created, but somehow it's still a welcoming place to generate community and to build together. So we're not in Tuscany, but we can imagine that we are still in a space of positive sort of affirmation for each other. And that's how I want to start in thinking about Women's History Month. Of course, Women's History Month is an American thing. There's no Women's History Month in Romania. There's March 8th, which if anybody who lived under communism still remembers, is the day that all the ladies get flowers and they get to go home and cook for all the guys who then come home and have a good time. And then 364 days later, it happens again. But what I'd like to say is that in 2021, it's actually a good time to take stock of how much has changed in Romania in terms of thinking about the past with a gender perspective and thinking about the past as something that affects 100% of the population, meaning women as men as well, and how sort of agency, the ability to live a good life, a life that's meaningful, has now been expanding to really include understanding the family differently, understanding women's contribution in literature, understanding the kind of political work that women have done on behalf of themselves and especially on behalf of others, I should say, and understanding how political, cultural, and economic processes affect us in ways that are structured in a gendered way. And I think we can talk more about that in the present, but I just wanted to observe that, 30 years ago, when communism fell and I started graduate school in 1991, so it's pretty much 30 years ago, there was nothing written about women's history other than a few genuflections done in the mid-70s to the International Women's Year and a few other publications after that were connected to that Decade of Women that the UN presented. And in essence, a lot of places in Eastern Europe started to produce research on women's history at that time. But there wasn't a real strong tradition of thinking historically about these issues. What we have discovered in the last 30 years, and the work of Mihaela, and I hope that she'll say more about it, and the people that she has encouraged in Romania, have generated the framework and the foundations for understanding both past and present in a gendered way. Mihaela, Stefania Mihailescu, mixing up her name, Stefania Mihailescu is as a person of unparalleled influence in that regard. This is a woman who spent over a decade, I believe, gathering all the possible printed materials from the 19th and first half of the 20th century that women, and not just feminists, but women activists published in Romania, giving us a workable archive that we didn't have to again reinvent with each generation to build off from. A lot has happened since then, but that is really the ground that I and others work on. And I think that this is the reason that we can be here and talk about this in somewhat positive terms. In addition to that, a lot of other things have happened to be somewhat celebratory about, although there's also sliding back in terms of all sorts of issues. But there's more interest in women writers today. Female authors have been publishing for a long time, but the place that they occupy in terms of public interest and in terms of understanding feminist, for instance, literature has really shifted to become much more powerful present. There's more diversity, also in terms of how women express themselves. Feminism is not the only flavor, and there's many flavors of feminism, of course. So we are growing, we are becoming less two-dimensional in our approach to women's history, and it's complicating the stories that we're telling, which is kind of my dream job is to dig through those archives and try to make sense of them. So I feel like we're in a good place in terms of those developments. Mihaela, you want to say something?
So it's difficult to speak about women's history when you are with Maria in the same room. And you can ask her about. This is the most reasonable attitude, because she is an impressive historian, and I know how much it costs. For example, she is spending Medium 1 month every year coming to Bucharest or other cities in Romania, searching in our archives. She said that she is in a sort of holiday, but in fact she's working 10 hours a day. Then we have our break on a terrace, enjoying our dinner, preparing and enjoying our dinner. And then in the night, late in the night, she's continued to think about she was finding during the day. And she's telling me a lot about that at the coffee in the morning, and then she leaves again and she goes to the archives. So in fact, in a way, we talk more about ourselves when we are, one in America, another one in Romania, because when she's in Bucharest, she's so busy, even if you are staying in the same home. So we came in feminism as scholars, civical attitude, and so on, from different domains. So basically, I was, and I'm still feeling like a philosopher. And in a way, for the philosophers, it's easier because they don't need so much, past in terms of history. They can imagine themselves as out of any kind of time if they want a dialogue of ideas. But in fact, I'll start by saying that I was totally disappointed during my philosophical studies for two reasons. I was studying just men philosophers, 0 women. And because I was a very good student, one of the professors told me, because my future husband was also my colleague, that in time I am smart enough to be his typewriter as philosopher. So in a way, I thought, why I do feel so bad and horrible, because they are taking us as women in philosophy like that. And this was not at all the only case. In fact, my first revelation that there is something like philosophy made by women, taking women's experiences into account, was just in 91, after the collapse of communism. So that is 30 years ago. So my history with feminist thinking, feminist reading, research, and writing started in 91, so exactly 30 years ago. And of course, because I was so you know, it was a sort of epiphany. I felt enlightened in a way, and very encouraged to be a philosopher as woman, not a philosopher as, you know, something disembodied. And my joy was so big, then I felt the need to share it with the others. So we started in Romania. This looks a bit pervert, but we started all the feminist movement in intellectual terms and then in activist terms from philosophy, exactly in the opposite side. So thinking in a philosophical way, we started to be feminist as sociologists, historians, psychologists, political scientists, etc., etc. So this was shocking and provoking. So in 94, I started the first classes in feminist philosophy, and then because I was already in a political science department, I converted myself to political science. It was very important. It was nothing like that before 90, so it was another pioneering work, in fact. And because I got power for a while as a dean, I was able to introduce the first MA in gender studies in Romania in 98. So we have already 22 years of graduates in gender and politics and minorities, and so on. This is already a history itself. And from this, you know, academic framework, it was possible to have, you know, informated, enlightened, impressive scholars who did academic stuff or who migrated in building women's organization, women's rights organization, feminist organization, a feminist movement, all you know, the most important actions in terms of fighting against domestic violence, etc., etc. Some of them are even in politics. So very few of them is true. This is not. This is our failure. Not many of them are in politics. So, but you know, now I feel a little bit detached as a, you know, as a former, as a pioneer or somebody very responsible in building, you know, this side of the story for our own society. And almost 3 years ago, I gave them all the power in terms of MA, and I am no longer a professor there at the MA in gender and politics, because they are another generation. And you know, when somebody at my age and with such a reputation, it is a very heavy shadow. And I felt the need to step back and to leave them to do it in their way. They were in a very different situation, having, you know, in their basic academic background, feminism and gender approaches. So this is another generation with another courage and even other ideological options than me. So I behave like a grandma. Okay, now it's your time. So do it. in your way. I'm happy to watch you.
So well said, and with so much grace, to be really, I'm just taking in your words, because you said it in such a, I don't find the right word to describe.
I think
besides
wisdom.
grace. Yeah,
Wisdom might be the
wisdom and
word.
grace.
I have reached the age of wisdom, yes. It happens with everybody.
And it sounds like you planted the seeds and now you enjoy seeing, the fruits of your work.
Sometimes I am not enjoying, but okay, that's it. They are autonomous.
Yeah.
In fact, my main concept, that means a sort of, axiom, is that feminism is women's road to autonomy. And I have to respect their own autonomy, okay, even if I like it or not. But this is not their issue.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, and I can imagine, when you describe the work the two of you have done when Maria is in Bucharest, and the dedication and the commitment that the two of you have for such an incredible cause. It's such a model. I think it's a model for many, and even if we extract just a part of it, it's still extremely valuable. Maybe not everyone that you influence as scholars and feminists and activists is going to, follow you exactly as you have done, but
They have not to.
Yeah, a little bit.
They have not the duty to follow me. That's for sure.
Exactly, but the inspiration and the model, I think it's extremely valuable, and I personally appreciate it, and look at you as two people that I can learn from. I would like to move to the book, the book that the two of you co-authored. It has an intriguing title, right? Birth of Democratic Citizenship, Women and Power in Modern Romania. For me personally, I have not lived in a democratic Romania. So I don't even know what that looks like. I left in 1990. I don't know. I grew up in communism. And that's pretty much the only model I know in relationship to Romania. So I'm extremely curious to learn from you and to hear what you have to say about what does it mean actually? What is it like for a woman living through this transition from communism to democracy?
We don't have an order here, so we're kind of like, who goes first?
I think you go first, Maria.
Okay. So the project that we engaged in was one that lasted almost a decade for a variety of reasons that are both professional and personal. The research started in 2009 and went on for a couple of years. And then there were years of processing it, because we ended up interviewing 101 women. And we very purposefully stayed away from Bucharest, because Bucharest is such a complex society with particularities of its own that to us seemed a little bit removed from what we believed was the more average experience of women in Romania. So what we did is we went to Hunedoara, which is where Mihaela hails from. It gave us some advantages in the sense that we knew people, we were welcome in the community. It's very hard to talk about profoundly intimate and disturbing things with people who don't trust you, as we can all appreciate. And so going to a community that we knew was really important. And we snowballed. We kind of built from the people we knew to others who led us to 101 women. What's to me important about the study, in terms of the question you asked, Mihaela Campion, the question about like the woman, right? Of course, there's many kinds of women, and there's a lot of diversity in women's experience of communist transition and now the neoliberal order that we have in Romania. but we wanted to kind of look beyond sort of the super educated professional women. They're not absent, they're very much present, but they're present alongside women from rural and far less formally educated backgrounds, together with women who work in a variety of professions and also who are economically and socially on different kind of steps of accomplishment or power or autonomy, as you know, Mihaela likes to think about. Women who embrace a number of religious denominations, and that was kind of an interesting part of the project. And also women who are not all ethnically Romanian. We had Hungarian and German ethnics in our group. So we wanted to kind of get a flavor through that 101 interviews of, are there core experiences, you know, that women had and that really shaped how they understood both the communist regime politically in a gendered way and their idea of citizenship, and then post-communism. And so the thing that I walked away from this book with, that's most kind of powerful for me, is that women have an understanding of partnership and their relationships at home that to me speak of a sense of self that is both family oriented, but it's also civically oriented. But that in terms of the civic orientation, they have a sense of themselves as caretakers, and of ethical probity when it comes to civic behavior that has found frustrating kind of opportunities in public life. Because the way in which politics has evolved since 1990, and Mihaela can say a lot more about that, has been to discount this ethic of care in politics, to not value it, to not consider it as a common good, to consider it as a weakness, I would say, more than anything else, and to trash it. And that has produced frustration on the part of women. It has produced rejection, and of a few occasions that we narrate in the book, pragmatic responses. Pragmatic responses that have been very successful in relation to where these women started and where they are now. And I'm thinking about, you know, the two women, Mihaela, in the municipal council, and then the doctor, you know, nearby, Onedora. But there are very few women that actually have found participation in the civic sense and political sense rewarding and respectful of their values, personal, as gender beings, and as citizens of Romania. So what I walked away with is there are enormous missed opportunities in Romania in terms of capturing this kind of energy and this kind of thinking about the common good, that if Romanian politicians and voters thought through a bit more, it might come up with some very different solutions to the problems we're facing now, both generally, but COVID-wise as well. Mihaela, maybe you can say more about that, because you know you're living through it. You're muted, maybe? No, no sound.
I'm sorry, I have two little dogs in the house. Sometimes they are barking, so I'm just cut off the micro. You know, in fact, what we discovered, it was that women were not so different as citizens in terms of rural or urban, or in terms of you know, a very educated and lower educated, but in terms of generations. So in fact, at least we had to work in an analytical manner with the results, which design in a very specific way 3 generations. One which we were calling the communist generation of communists, and in fact is the generation of my mother. Those who were raised in communism, who in fact were born before communism, were raised and educated, and they worked during communism, and the most of them already retired when the communists collapsed, the generation of transition from communist to democracy, and this is my generation, and the generation of democracy, who were something around 24 when we questioned them during the interviews. And we notice clear similarities in terms of the attachment for democracy. This was very clear. So we had from 101 women, we never talked to a woman who was against democracy or who formulated things which are not related to democracy, even a sort of chauvinist or racist attitude. So no extremists among 101 women, no extremists at all. This was really impressive. Even if the most of them were very traditional in terms of religious values. And what we noticed was that communist secularization, in fact, it valued nothing, because once the religion was free, they came back to the religious tradition, but for sure, they don't want to extend the religious tradition through politics. They are feeling that it is something in between, which they are calling moral, in a non-religious way, who has to be in politics in order to have, and they mention, real democracy, true democracy. If we compare what they are saying with the kind of politics which are specific to consolidated democracies, for example, the democracies in Nordic states, in Scandinavia, which are the most consolidated democracy and less corrupted countries. In fact, they are describing something very, very similar. What is different between the three generations is that, for example, the generation of communists were a little bit, more, they pay some gratitude to the communist opportunities, mainly education and qualification and the working place. This was, for them, it was a sort of progress compared to the generation of their own parents, especially with their own mothers. And they shared a sort of gratitude for education, mainly for education. But they were very sad for their own parents, which collapsed during communism. The generation of transition, they felt they won nothing to communism, absolutely nothing, because it was their merit for having a very good education, being very good in their professions and so on, and they rather treated communism as a huge obstacle, and mainly obstacle as women, because this generation was deeply affected by the pro-natalist policy. And for them, it was a disaster. We have some descriptions there, which are some stories who are horrible about this kind of experiences. What was shocking for us, it was a democracy generation. That means a generation who knows almost nothing about communism, who are little children, and they remember them, sometimes their mothers brought them oranges or something like that. So I was a little girl, and my parents loved me, my grandparents loved me. Sometimes I had chocolate or oranges. So their memories are very vague about the regime. But it was for the first time, because we had a question for all of them. If your husband could earn enough for you to stay home, will you accept that? And none of the women from the generation of communism and the transitions said yes. They were something like shocked. I cannot accept that. I cannot think about that. I want to be independent. What is that, to depend on men's will and so on and so forth? And we are shocked to notice that in the younger generation, the democracy generation, it appeared the opinion that maybe I stay home and I'll be happy to, to have the entire life around my own family in a private space. It was shocking for us, because we thought that they will need, or they will be very willing to be independent and to assert themselves and so on. It was not exactly the case. Not all of them, of course, but some of them. None of the other generations could imagine to give up their independence, economic independence, for example. This was, very interesting. In terms of findings, so somebody, a very dear friend of ours, has put it as a question. Women are very deontologists, and they think in principle, as a matter of principle about politics, but they look to be very utilitarian, and they are able to compromise in terms of private relations. Why is that? Because they don't have enough experience in politics, but they have a huge experience in the private life. So, of course, we still have to think about it. But in the same time, as Maria said, many of their solutions could be exceptional public policies, far better than the policies which are now produced by the local and national leaders.
The wisdom leaves us with a moment of reflection. And I can see, Maria, that you wanted to say something. I could tell. You are muted.
All right, I'm here. No, I'm very much in agreement with Mihaela. The one thing I wanted to add, though, is as we launched the book, literally a week before the lockdown in Romania, COVID lockdown, we did this tour through, went to Bucharest, Hunedoara, which was a very special book launch because our co-authors were there with us. It was like a family reunion, fantabulous. Sibiu and Cluj were the other places that we have launches at. And it was really impressive to me how many young people were present. I would say that they were self-selected because they were in college towns, and they clearly were students at the universities, Babeș-Bolyai and Sibiu. And so the questions they asked, the kind of interest they took, I think may not be the average response of, the democracy generation that Mihaela was talking about. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as I think that there are ways in which this attitude that she was signaling about may be challenged by some of the activists, the people that Mihaela trained, to be perfectly honest, and other allies that are understanding these problems in a proactive way and trying to engage young people and thinking critically, both men and women. When we have more feminist men in the younger generation than in older generations, it's actually one of the wonderful things to observe in Romania right now. So, there's also a bit of a brightness to this story as well.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because this was one of the questions I personally had, working with people, men and women and couples. So that's, in my professional work, I see a lot of things in the dynamic, in the shift that we are witnessing, even in the United States. Yes, we have a longer history of feminism here, but there is still a lot of stigma. And it's still a lot to work on. The progress is happening, but not completely. There is no completion of progress, in my opinion. So I think, this was one of the questions that I wanted to ask both of you. How is it like in Romania? Because I think for women to acquire that autonomy that you were talking about, Mihaela, and the independence, to have equal rights. We cannot do this alone. We need allies, and we need men. We need men to be on our side. We need men.
And this happened. This happened. Even, for example, I'll give you very concrete examples.
Okay.
The first one is that at my classes, for example, or always male students, many of them. And in fact, they became the main allies of the feminist organization. They belong to this sort of feminist organization. They are participating to the protests and so on. But in fact, we had very good allies also in politics. For example, now the mayor is a mayor of Cluj. He was our best ally in introducing the constitutional principle of equal opportunities, and also in supporting equal opportunity law. And we had a Minister of Justice, Stoica, who really was wonderful in terms of all the laws which passed from 2000 to 2004. And I cannot imagine how could we do in terms of politics without them, and without some others, few others who were, prominent, powerful, extraordinary, and believers in this sort of causes. And in the same time, very good friend of ours. So usually when, Romania became, from a legislative point of view, an European country, because this was the first step, in fact. So we really needed politician support. We were not so protesters as the younger generation is. We were trying to, rather to seduce them to our ideas. Was another kind of relation. In fact, I took care about the result, about the consequences. And if, for example, at that time, it was very important to have a friendly relation with politicians in order to help you to promote such a kind of laws, it was extraordinary. So yes, and of course, even husbands were playing a role. For example, the law against discrimination, which passed in 2000. One of the initiators was my husband, who was a state secretary in the government. So you can use everything in order to, increase women's rights, freedoms, and so on. So yeah, none was unorthodox. In fact, they were very fair from a moral point of view, but there are different kinds of strategies. We were not so confrontational. Mm-hmm. I became confrontational with the younger generation. I am participating with them to the protests now, but from the very beginning, we were trying to negotiate in a friendly manner and to, seduce them for our idea, feminist ideas and politics.
Can you say more about why is it needed to be more confrontational with the younger generation?
Because the quality of the political class decreased in a dramatic manner. So now it's very difficult to have friends in politics and to have a proper dialogue with the most of them. Of course, things changed in the last elections because now we have two parties who are, with us and who really are trying to help this sort of politics and who have women and men who are feminists. I'm talking about Plus especially and USR. So they are our, main political alliance. But before that, we had a very tough time. We had a populist party, very corrupt, which was not at all left. It was a, left populist party. Everything collapsed around us in terms of justice, and law and so on and so forth. So our agenda was rather related to the rule of law. So if we cannot have the rule of law, it is very difficult to have feminist politics. And during this terrific government, we had the first woman prime minister, who was the crypto servant of the interests of the head of the party. So it was very difficult. They were saying something like, you have a woman, the first prime minister in Romanian history. Are you satisfied or not? No, we were not. We are satisfied now because the head of the Senate is a woman and she is a feminist. This is different. I am talking about Anca Paliu Dragoș. Yes.
So we mentioned feminism quite a bit, and I'm not sure if everyone who is listening to us today is clear, because as Maria said earlier, there are different ways of feminism, right? There are different interpretations of feminism. So I would like to know from both of you your definition, your explanation of what
I say just 2 words. No, feminist is, the missing part of the classical humanism. The classical humanist, who was, the philosophical and moral framework to create human rights. It created universal male rights. So this is why I'm saying that feminism is the missing part of classical humanism.
So I would define feminism as the insistence that inequities and structural forms of discrimination that are based on assumptions about gender, on gender norms, right, is feminism, drawing attention to those kinds of forms of discrimination, of inequities, and insisting that they be addressed as a matter of common good. That's my definition. And it might be a matter of individual rights, depending on the specifics of the problem in the society and all that. It might be a matter of religious discourse about our gendered selves. There's many ways in which we can understand how gender norms become embodied in different forms that humans operate. But it is the insistence of drawing attention to those structural forms of inequity and discrimination, and the insistence on addressing them publicly and for the common good.
Okay, I have other 2 things to say about it being I totally agree with Maria. Yes, it's a question of gender justice. It's also a question of, the way the modern society was created. It was created by men as intellectuals and politicians, as scientists and so on and so forth. And of course, because they are men and they have own experiences, they created a world which can be extraordinary, it's true, according to their way of thinking, according to their experiences, their hierarchies, and so on. There is another half of humanity which has to design the world. In order to have a whole design, the design has to be made by both of them in all the aspects of life and in all the domains, in science, in politics, in literature, everywhere. Because as humanity, we are both women and men, and we have also to see the world through the women's eyes, through their brains, through their minds, their experiences. is a missing part of the humanity, as I said. So from this point of view, I think that it's a way to enrich in an extraordinary way what we have already. That means what we inherited already. A dominant masculine culture, science, and so on. Extraordinary achievements. That's wonderful, but maybe we want to contribute in our ways, and we don't need obstacles. We have to be fully free to achieve what we can and to change humanity, maybe in a better way, I don't know. Maybe this can be our contribution. Anyway, since women came more and more into politics, if you notice, in the last 80 years, at least in Europe, it was not another war. So the world is a little bit more pacific. It's searching for other kind of solutions than, you know, the warrior kind of solution. And I used to say something like, you know, I want to get rid of feminism. In 5 minutes, if all the others will get rid of misogyny, sexism, and patriarchy. In the next minute, for sure, I know I don't have reasons to be a feminist.
That's a fair trade. I sign up for that as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit, both of you mentioned the political atmosphere in Romania. Some of us here in the United States may not be fully aware of it or too familiar. What can you tell us about the future of feminism and gender studies through the lens of the new political, institutional structure in Romania, and also with this new party that came into power, is any challenge for feminism, or how do you see that?
Maria, you are very familiar with the topic.
Well, you live in the topic, so I'll give it a try, and I'm sure that I'll learn a lot more from you in the next few minutes. So genders, they're at the same time that the kind of progress that Mihaela talked about in politics was happening, there's other forces of polarization at play, forces that are very much connected to transnational networks of political influence based on a very negative perspective of gender studies and all LGBTQI rights and advocacy, and of feminism that moves anywhere beyond the binary. We will respect your right to reproductive control. It might actually be abortion, but okay, depends. Like Poland, things are a little different. And yes, you can continue to work. Like those people are okay with that. But anything beyond that, that addresses other structural inequities based on gender, that speak to epistemologies that are exclusionary with regard to gender justice, right? And that especially with the question of LGBTQI rights, right, as a kind of a community that exists, right? They challenge the reality of that. This has been a movement that the United States have been extremely like a strong participant in, and I don't mean the government necessarily, but I do mean financial resources, networks of evangelical groups. Steve O'Bannon traveled to Europe after he lost his position, got buddies with radical right-wing QAnon-like extremists in places from, you know, Hungary to Poland to Romania. There were QAnon protests in Bucharest last year or the year before. It was kind of like I couldn't even understand what was going on, that this existed. But these networks have been developing. So I'm bringing that context in because last year in June, right, In Romanian, we have a saying, "Țara arde, baba se piaptănă." So, full COVID. Things are not good economically. The country is in shutdown. It's like collapsing economically. And this one guy, while we're on Zoom with regard to how the parliament functions, decides he's going to introduce a law that makes gender studies illegal because it's a form of proselytism, and specifically of, basically his argument is the same argument that you've heard in the States. People who believe in trans rights or people who believe in pedophilia and who want to encourage men dressing as women, going to bathrooms and sexually abusing children. That's just like, you know, the 2 seconds version of the argument. But the argument was not much more complicated and sophisticated than this. That law made it to the floor, which is shocking because it's written so badly and it's full of ignorant statements about, you know, not factually based about anything, was voted and was going to become a law until thousands of people from the country and outside of the country started writing, you know, amici curiae briefs to the president asking him to veto it. And so he punted, he sent it to the Constitutional Court. It sat there for half a year. And as I understand from my friends in Romania, Mihaela maybe can say more about that. Part of it is because people on the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court, were not exactly sure what this was about in terms of the content. Now, finally, the law was, you know, evacuated basically by the Constitutional Court on the grounds that it was self-contradictory with regard to how it spoke about the right to, I think, to protest, to criticize, right? So it was a technical issue that it was rendered illegal on, a technical issue, not content. The law, the argument from the Constitutional Court didn't say gender studies is a valuable form of knowledge formation that should have the same place as mathematics, sociology, demography, etc., all these other established disciplines. It didn't say that. It had nothing to say about the content. It was a technical issue that it was turned down on. I say that because I think it's really important when we think into the future that if we're so then it was like, oh, great, you know, hey, academic freedom's here. Academic freedom is here to some extent. But if we're going to bury gender studies in public by saying, you girls, go out there and do your thing, nobody's going to pay attention to it. That is not a victory. That is burying it in public. The issue that I'm really concerned about right now is that people in politics, but also in other academic fields, because that's the issue that I find most problematic, start reading the stuff, start educating themselves about the way in which gender norms really function in our society. You know, when somebody like Lavrik, this guy who's now senator for this, you know, misogynist, racist, vaccine denier party, starts talking about women as lacking the ability to think in abstract ways, because that is his fundamental kind of basic way of thinking about women. And he sits there in parliament and, you know, he maintains that position because he's got that power. He's allowing a lot of other people to behave the same way. And if it's just Mihaela, me, and 3 other gender studies people saying, are you crazy? Are you people not paying attention to what's happening in the world? If it's just us, things are not going to get better. What I'm waiting for is that sleuth of sociologists, anthropologists, political scientists, philosophers, humanists, who are not gender studies experts, coming out and saying, you know, yeah, that book, Drumul către autonomie, that should be a good read for everybody who does sociology or political science. That's what I'm waiting for.
Yeah, I think you have to wait. Okay, I want to add something. I think it's important about this, you know, crazy law, because in fact it was simply stupid. Can you imagine, Mihaela, that in the text of the law it was something like, you are not allowed to educate people from the kindergarten to, universities, through the idea that gender is different from sex. That's more than stupid. This was in the content of the law, a huge stupidity. So they don't accept the idea that gender is a cultural form, it's a social construct, and sex is a biological fact. So this was written in the law. We don't accept any kind of difference between biology and culture, in fact. What is very sad is that some important and influential academics, in fact, they inspired this law. And they really were very supportive with this point of view, and very, very noisy. And this was, sad. I'm talking about important universities in Romania and about the people who have really influence and an encyclopedical culture, but I don't know which kind of morals they have. Anyway, Maria, I sent a petition to National Council for Fighting Discrimination in December against Lavrik, and I don't have any answer till now. Yes, okay, that's interesting. Also, it's very interesting, yes. But I want to say something about the way we acted at that moment. The main partner was, in fact, the National School for Political Studies and Public Administration, who has a very bad prestige of being progressist as institution. So progressism is a sort of curse for these right-wing guys. So we have the reputation of being progressists, supporting minority rights, women's rights, having classes and so on against racism, etc. This is already too much. So having a whole program for gypsies and for Roma people with important Roma intellectuals and so on. But there were more than 800 signatures. 5 important universities, they were they signed with us for that, and many important, impressive academics from all over the world, especially from United States. Maria was, of course, one. Catherine Verdery, Gail Kligman, Judith Butler, John Scott. So heavy names in terms of, academic prestige, and many from European Union. They signed this petition, and this petition was given to the Constitutional Court with the amicus curiae, with important information about the case, in order to help the Constitutional Court to have an informed approach on this issue. And of course, I don't think that they even had the curiosity to see what is inside. So yes, it was difficult, but not surprising. We knew from the very beginning that it will be tough, but for the younger generation, it's shocking, because they thought that many things are already a fait accompli. We have rights, so it's like we're having hands. We'll be able to take out our rights. It's possible. It's very possible.
Yeah.
And it happened. Look at the Poland. Look at Hungary. Yeah. Look at Turkey, who now it's out of Istanbul Convention. It was signed in Istanbul, and they don't want to be a part of it anymore. So yeah, everything is possible. Yeah, we have nothing for granted. And by Trump experience, you know very well by yourself that we have nothing for granted.
Yeah, yeah. And especially for democracy that it's fragile, you know, it's even more possible to make it disappear. So I think it's important to continue.
I think democracy is fragile almost everywhere.
Yeah, it is. We've seen it in the United States, and you know, quite scary. I would like, before we move to the questions and comments from the audience, and again, whoever is listening to us today, you are welcome to comment and ask questions in the comment section. I would like to ask you the last question that I have, which is related to COVID. What have you seen? What do you imagine it's going to happen post-COVID when it comes to women's rights, to gender studies, the traditional roles that you know, women and men have? Do you see anything coming after COVID?
We have a research which was done by PHILIA, Center for Gender Analysis, PHILIA, a report, which is very, you know, clear in terms of numbers. For example, 2/3 of the people who have lost their jobs during COVID are women. 2/3, yes. 14% are more insecure at home than they were before COVID. That means in their relation with their partners. 42% are single workers for their family. But some good signs are that men are more involved in the domestic work, less than a rural area, because it's a shame there for a man to cook, for example, or to wash. Help for the children's education has increased with 12% for mothers and 4% for fathers. The violence in the family increased a lot. And of course, the income decreased a lot, both for men and women. But thinking of the fact that 92% of single parents are women, you can imagine that for them it was for sure harder than for men.
I don't have a study about Bloomington, Indiana, but what I can say based on, you know, larger studies done in the last 12 months is that there's a lot of similarities transnationally between what Mihaela narrates in Romania with other places. One of the things that I think has become really apparent is that women who have a reputation to be multitaskers and to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, you know, be a caretaker and also cook and write a fantastic book, you know, that analyzes sexism and whatever, you know, that like, this is us, right? And that's our reputation. And that over these 12 months, the extent to which employers, family members have taken that for granted is truly shocking. I happen to be a lucky person because I live with a partner who does not behave in any of those ways. But my institution has treated the issue of the gap between, you know, caretakers' stress mentally, physically, economically, right? And the kind of, you know, we live in a still 24 hours in a day. That's still what we got. That issue of like time management and rewards and being able to relax and to be able to kind of come back to do this task has affected women disproportionately across I would say economic diversity, across racial diversity, although much more women of color because of the kind of compounded economic issues and being on the front lines of dealing with COVID, especially, right? And so what I see is disparities getting bigger, and the solutions so far have not been solutions that tend specifically to those problems I just highlighted. Now, in the States, we have just had this landmark, incredible legislative, sort of departure from the past in terms of how we understand children as an economic burden, and caretaking as something that needs to be dealt with proactively by the government. So the kind of support that's going now to especially lower income folks in the United States is really hitting where it's supposed to. And I think I think, well, I can always be hopeful. That's what I'm expressing here, that longer term, the results that this policy has will be encouraging enough to continue to fund things like childcare, to the extent that, the United States is one of 3 countries in the world at this point that are like developed, that do not have any kind of paid family leave as a fundamental policy of the government. It's shocking. And so if that alone changes, and I think we are on the path to that, I see longer term some important changes in how gender inequities get dealt with in this country.
For sure. Okay, so let's see what we have from the audience. I'm very curious about that. Karina, hold on a second. I have one question here that I would like to read it before you step in. So we have a question, actually 2 questions in one. Who are the young and upcoming Romanian gender studies scholars we should follow? And can you recommend any books from them?
Okay,
you answer.
Yes. So I have some recommendations who are really very good, who are also authors of important books. One of them is Oana Băluță. So just follow her on Facebook and Google her for the books. Another one is Diana Naga, and they are teaching at this MA. I still teaching at the MA, and she worked a lot also in gender and citizenship and other kind of things. Mariuca Constantin, who is working on women's rights, who is really very good. Alina Dragolea, who is working on gender justice and social issues. They are important, and if that depends, they have a collection, for example, a collection of gender studies at Polyrom Publishing House, and they can have a general idea just looking at that, because there are important topics they want to, for example, to read about, as the problem of single mothers. And this is Cristina Mihai, or the problem of prostitution. And this is Alina Tăricianu, the problem of women in Islam. And this is Alina Isaac, etc. Or women in education. They have a lot. We have a lot of women who are working on education. We have sociologists who are doing field research in an impressive manner. So for sure, they have a lot of new authors in the new generation, the generation of, almost the generation of my daughters, and in time, even Maria's daughter. We have a few time until they will be, others will be the generation of Maria's daughter. So there is a huge, an important school. There is an important school in Cluj. There is an important school at Bucharest University, created by Ionela Băluță, who have an excellent expertise in gender equality and equal opportunities. They created, a very important MA on this sort of issue. So it's a question of, if they have different kind of curiosities, just type Feminism Romania certain topic, for example, domestic violence, or gender budget or something like that. So yes, they can find everything. But the first step for them, which is easy, but I'm talking about those who have access to the Romanian literature or literature in Romania, is this collection Gender Studies at Polyrom, because it's easier to go there. But it's also Tritonic, it's European Institute and other publishing houses who have who published a lot. But for the younger one, many of the young women, at least they are not so young. Many of them are between 34 and 40, so they were young. We are waiting for the younger one. It's the second important generation in this field, and they are impressive. So anyway, they are closer with our audience as generation and as topics than I am.
I want to add just a couple of things. One is that Mihaela mentioned the inroads that CNSPA has made in terms of engaging with questions of gender justice in the Roma community. And so Carmen Gheorghe is somebody that I highly recommend as a really bright scholar who looks intersectionally at questions of racism and gender injustice in Romania from inside the Roma community. And she is both an activist and a scholar. She's published in English and in Romanian both. So I think you can find her stuff easily. Two, Revista Transilvania, if you're a Romanian reader, had a number dedicated to gender studies, the last number in Romania, the last number of 2020, December 2020. It has both studies. Not coincidentally, Mihaela and I both have studies there, but there's a bibliography that goes with our interventions as well as other people's. And so you'll see also products from this younger generation of scholars who are looking towards also questions of gender identity and kind of queering Romanian gender studies more than, in past generations. So I just wanted to put those out there.
Yes.
And if you're reading Doar o Revistă and Scena Nouă, these are two publications that are feminist. Whether they're writing about women or not, they're feminist.
So, and there are many differences. Of course, I told you more about academic books, but in fact, it is already an impressive literature. Sofia Polanski, it's her, it's her author name. In fact, it's Medea Iancu, who is really important, and she's so, she's writing a lot of feminist manifestos, even in a poetic manner. So yes, there are a lot who are, the younger generation is more, is closer to cultural studies. Those who came after, everything we had already, they are, many of them are from other areas. The classical ones who are from political science, history, sociology, philosophy. So the new ones are also from literature.
That's very
anthropology, etc.
Very, very helpful to know about that. Crina, any questions that you collected? Are you with us, Crina?
Yes, I am. I just wanted to make sure that I'm not on mute, and I'm not.
Okay.
Lots of the comments are very appreciative and grateful for the discussion and for the topics that you have brought to our attention. Also, there are lots of comments interested in the literature and asking to post more resources in the comments. So we will come back to post some of the things that you mentioned, but feel free to come back as well and add some more resources as there is quite a bit of interest in continuing these studies, including the resources that Mihaela has gathered and Maria had accessed for her research. So there is quite a bit of interest in this. Among comments, many of them were coming in as the discussions were, and Roxana mentioned related to the pandemic that affirming what you have said, that the heteronormative gender roles continue to persist. And in US, there are particular in the private sector where the division of labor is gender, and especially the roles in the house, and especially in the areas that are hotbeds for traditional conservative ideologies. There were also comments related to the law of that was pushed through the Romanian legal system, right to eliminate gender studies. And one question was if Maria is aware whether there were such laws pushed in the United States.
What we have in the United States was an attempt by the Betsy DeVos Department of Education administration a couple of years ago at the very beginning of the Trump administration to basically define gender as sex at birth in the way that Mihaela was also describing the attempt of the Romanian law, coming into place. It was an internal rule of the Department of Education, so it didn't have to be legislated. There's all sorts of ways to get around an actual public debate, and that can be for the good or for the bad of depending on what position you take and what the actual rule is. But in this case, it was basically, the intent was to disallow people who are trying to get federal money from the Department of Education to apply for funding and to receive funding if they were to define gender and sex as anything different from each other. So without calling it a law and without, taking it through a public debate, it was trying to do exactly what the Romanians were trying to do. That didn't work out because, well, I think incompetence is the word that comes to mind when it comes to the Betsy DeVos administration, the Trump administration. These people tripped on themselves with regard to these kinds of things. And it stayed at the level of possible intervention, but it never went beyond that. And those rules have been evacuated as soon as the new administration came in. So that's where we are now in the States.
Crina, I received here a question as well, if you don't mind, which seems to be very interesting. Is there mutual support between the fights for women and LGBT people in Romania?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. Yes, when it was a referendum for so-called the referendum for family, in order to introduce in the constitution in a written form that the marriage is possible just between man and woman. This was a case for a huge solidarity. And at the same time, in our MA is included, there are LGBT rights are object of study. Mm-hmm. As for example, Roma masculinities and other things like that. So we have a huge solidarity, and the most of the participants in parade and so on, the most of them were feminists, in fact. Sometimes And also we have a large solidarity with ecological movements or with different kind of justice movements. I wish for a similar solidarity of all the others with us. It's true.
Mm.
I'll recommend to look up Florin Buhuceanu if you can read Romanian. I think it's published in English actually as well, but he's one of the main leaders of the LGBTQ activist / scholarly community who's been.
His partner was our MA student.
Right, and Florin has been really active for over a decade now. I mean, he created the Pride March and established a bunch of other forms of both celebrating and interrogating heteronormativity. Not celebrating heteronormativity, celebrating alternatives to heteronormativity, and producing spaces for criticism in that direction. Not everybody is a fan of non-heteronormative sort of ways of thinking about gender studies in Romania. Not everybody. And there's definitely divisions within feminists, divisions that are being nicely exploited by those who want to bring this unity to feminist goals. That's something that's happening in Romania in the same way that it's happening in other parts of the world, including this country. So, they're common kind of tropes and processes at play here in Romania that I think are recognizable for an American audience.
Wow, we have an appreciative comment here coming in. Thank you to Archer, Mihaela, Miroiu, and Maria Bucur for this wonderful event. Hopefully Archer will post the many resources mentioned by both these great scholars. They are highly necessary. We look forward to enjoying more talks given by them. Good luck. We'll continue with continuing this great work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. And I'm sure the two of you have a great impact on all of us. And we salute and congratulate you for everything you do and follow you.
What can I say something? So both of us are public figures. Anybody who wants to look us up, as Mihaela Campion said at the beginning, Google us. Ne Googleiți, because I answer to email, Mihaela answers to email. We're out there. We're happy to work with people who are interested in these areas. Don't have to agree on everything with everybody. It's all about building community and solidarity for some common purpose.
Yeah, and I hope, my deepest wish and hope is that we can continue this conversation. I think your expertise and the magnitude of this topic is as such as doesn't allow to cover much in 1 hour or an hour and 15 minutes. But I would be thrilled if you can come back at some point and dive into more details and more, information that you can bring to our awareness.
Mihaela, we like to do a lot of things together. A lot of things. We are searching for the opportunity to do it. That's sure.
Great.
And thank you for creating this sort of opportunity. And I'm very delighted to meet you, even it is bi-dimensional.
Yes.
But anyway, I hope to meet you in person.
I hope so too. I dream sometimes going back to Bucharest. It's my hometown, and I have, I see myself walking on some of the streets where I grew up. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, everybody who supported this event from Archer. I want to mention a few names that have been constantly in support of creating this event. It's Andrea Motram, Crina Tarasi, and Raresh also, and Andrea, and everybody at Archer who is thrilled to be part of this organization and to contribute in any possible way. It's a need, it's mission that we embarked on to bring and discuss openly about social justice and human rights in diaspora, in Romanian communities, and to have the courage to say things that haven't been said for so many years, especially during communism, and even today, continuing that tradition sometimes, which is not a healthy tradition of not talking about important issues. So here we are, and I thank you again, Mihaela and Maria. I feel extremely honored and grateful to have you here today, and I hope we can repeat this at some point. And thank you everybody who was listening to us.
Thank you everybody. Have a good life. Be free as soon as possible.
Yeah,
we want to break free.
Autonomy. Fight for your
healthy.
autonomy.
Free to fly from one to another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.